Welcome to today's video. We're going to be discussing about intellectual property in the context of the World Trade Organization, and specifically we're going to talk about the TRIPS agreement, but just in a more general way we're going to discuss how less developed countries, in the classification that the World Trade Organization adopts, and we're going to discuss how there is a continuous form of bias that has been entrenched using the global international organizations, and how we're going to also discuss about how the institutions such as the World Trade Organization are specifically set up, or they have been formed to keep the current system of things as it is. And so we're going to talk about how some of the policies, some of the treaties that have been negotiated by countries in these institutions are insincere, or they're disingenuous. A lot of the treaties are unfair. They've been unfairly skewed in favor of the countries, the more developed countries, and none at the expense of countries that are called or referred to as less developed countries. So the targeted audience of my video is specifically people who are melanated, and the reason that I'm doing this is that there are so many issues, underlying issues that have been unaddressed over such a long period of time, and one of these, obviously I've been talking about bias, but because there has been a lot of oppression that has stemmed over centuries and it has not been addressed. So I'm going to be talking about the indifference that has been there in first world countries and those that are referred to as developed countries. And there's a lot of indifference because most people in the society just conduct their lives as if everything is alright, that there's no issue, that there are no issues, and because they have formed so many political organizations, including the most famous one is the European Union, and most people would tend to believe that it was formed, and it is indicated that it was formed in 1993, even though a lot of the backbone of the European Union had been formed way before that had happened. And we're going to talk about, for instance, how the Berlin Conference of 1886 saw somewhat of a union being formed amongst European countries, but nobody in these first world and developed countries talks about it, because the current order and the current global order officially seemed to have taken shape after the culmination of the Second World War. And so there has been a lot of indifference, not only by people who are Caucasian, but also by people who are melanated in these first world countries, including the United States of America, whether it's the countries that are in Europe. And we are so quick as people who are oppressed to forget some of the places that we have come from, and a lot of the policies that have been adopted by groups such as, or international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, are still skewed against people who share genetic and share historical origins. And so we've got to put up some sort of resistance to some of these policies, because they entrench the same systems that were used to oppress us for centuries. So I want to talk about another aspect that enables the bias to be entrenched, which is the subtleness that is used in some of the policies and some of the treaties that are adopted by institutions such as the WTO and WIPO, because this video, believe it or not, is about intellectual property. And so we're going to talk about another thing, which is that there are very few contributions by less developed countries to the global intellectual property collection, or libraries. And so the expectation that we are, as countries from the global south, just the expectation that we should just follow along with the current stipulations of the WTO and the intellectual property regime that has taken control of the world, because we can see it in social media, we can see it in all these other places. That expectation is a bit too high and extreme, in my opinion. And so I summarize that because countries in the global south have not participated on equal footing in the development, in terms of development in the world, then it is disingenuous. It's unreasonable to expect countries that are disadvantaged not to own the larger block of the global intellectual property. And we're talking about some of the effects that the disposition in the world, which has necessarily meant that countries in the global south do not hold a good chunk of the intellectual property that exists. And whether we're talking about things like goals, whether we're talking about machinery, whether we're talking about processes, all of these are what hold the they hold sway and they hold the power when it comes to shaping the rules and the principles and they hold the keys to the future of the next rules and the next institutions and the policies that they're going to adopt when it comes to holding and dealing with intellectual property. And so let's just start by engaging in a didactic discussion of the, just some of these examples of inventions and the technology that exists in the world today. And we're going to talk about how countries in the global south are being put down. They're being actively put down, and their creativity is being suppressed, in order to protect the intellectual property of the countries that have benefited, which are the developed countries that have benefited from the oppression and the subjugation and a lot of it which involved brutality. So of these least/less developed countries. And so the fact is that there is not much or not any considerable amounts of intellectual property that are held by these least developed countries that are sufficient enough to switch or to change the current order of things in terms of a global trade. And so some of the policies that have been enacted are sort of like built in the air without any form of reality being expressed in them. And I'm talking about reality for people in the least developed countries. There's a very minimal advantage that African countries are gaining. There's a very limited amount of an advantage that least developed countries are benefiting from treaties such as the trade-related aspects of intellectual property. And a lot of it has come as a barrier rather than as an implement for integration of least developed countries into the global geopolitical system. And so I want us to talk about some of the solutions that I think would assist us to participate more actively in advocacy for countries that are least developed to access more intellectual property rights and intellectual property interests in the modern setting in terms of trade. And so because we don't get a lot of advantages from intellectual property, we are sort of like sitting ducks, and in future there's a risk that we will not, or we will lose any form of intellectual property that we create, because the current system, although the current system seems to be protecting the system itself from selfishness or unilateralism, and one of the concepts that's adopted by the WTO is called the most favored nation clauses, and they are worded, or they're drafted to look like they favor least developed countries to access technology and transfer of technology from the global north, which are the developed countries, and they are sort of like being extended to the global south and sort of like a good faith gesture. But in essence, the rules or the concepts that have been enshrined in treaties such as the TRIPS are, there's a hidden dagger, there's a cloak and dagger sort of concept going on there, where any of the intellectual property that we may form or we may develop, and if it were to advantage the world in some way, and we decide that, for instance, it would be more prudential to share it with our neighbors who are in the global south, to the exclusion of countries in the global north, which the global north has done for years and centuries, right? And currently, today, anybody could ask themselves if they are, residents, if they're denizens of, least developed countries. Just ask yourself whether your country holds any substantial intellectual property rights. If it's something to do with the stock market, does your country have like a live stock trading, system going on, or some of those technologies that they have in the Wall Street? We've got the Asian stock markets, we've got the Nikkei, we've got Nasdaq, which is in the USA, we've got the LSE, we've got all these stock trading institutions which have live stock trading and like a live channel to the global, the major financial institutions. And so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is how such tools can be used to frustrate or least developed countries from digging themselves out of the rut financially, where we don't have some of these, we don't have the technology and we don't have the rights to some of the intellectual property to these critical and substantive technologies. And so, um, one of the solutions that I thought about, and there has been a lot of backlash on African and other less developed countries, where we try and put up a resistance to oppression and the modern forms of oppression which are framed as democracy today, and so there's no true sense of independence. There is no true sense of independence that is accorded to countries in the global south, and the perpetrators of this inequality are the same ones who hold themselves to be the heroes, and they want to conduct all the donations, they want to extend all these loans to countries in the global south. But it is my greatest wish that we can see through all these poison chalices that we keep on accepting.